For the second time in as many seasons, the town started a football campaign with a 4-1 defeat, this time at home to Burnley, under the floodlights on Monday night. Alongside me to reflect on a disappointing evening of football is the Lutonian journalist James Cunliffe. As D. Ream once said, Jimbo, things can only get better.
That's the optimistic take. Yeah, let's go with that.
We'll reflect on the game after this intro.
For me, it's the people and the spirit of the people as well.
I love this town. I love this town. I love this town. You know what I love about this town is actually you. Everyone in it has got this massive soul.
We're Luton people, and that's what we care about.
Hello everyone, welcome along to another episode of the Luton Town Supporters Trust podcast, the longest running Luton Town podcast, sponsored this season by Solid, providing opportunities, provisions and assistance so our academy can fulfil their potential. And indeed, on Monday night, James, the potential was largely fulfilled with 2 academy products in the starting 11. But before we come on to that, what's your overriding thoughts after Monday night? I mean, we're recording this a couple of days later. We've both had a few family things this week. So we're recording this Wednesday. We've had enough time to mellow out, think it over and everything else. Are you as downbeat and downcast as everyone was on Monday, or upon a bit of reflection, is there a little bit more light at the end of the tunnel?
Time's a great healer, isn't it? I mean, yeah, we are recording this probably a day late, and that's because my daughter was in hospital, so big up the NHS and the L&D. She's all good now; she's all out, so it was a bit later than that. It also meant that I couldn't go to the game. So you lucky boy. So I had that sort of split second where I was kind of gutted, but family comes first, so I had to watch it on the TV. So it may be that aspect of it, that it wasn't that rawness of being at the game. You have the screen, it's a bit disassociated from it a little bit. So I was gutted the way it turned out, and you could see it coming, all day long, the first half particularly. So, a couple of days break from it. And, I think there are big things to solve, but at the same time, let's not get too overboard about it. It is the first game. If 10 games in, we've still got the same big problems, then, I'll be on the front line of the pickets, so to speak. But I think it's a bit much after the first game. I think the one thing is you've referenced the Brighton game last season. Everybody was giddy and high on the Premier League, and now this is going to be the word of the season. Expectation is slightly weighing heavy.
Yeah, there's reflections to be had, and there's also throwing toys out of prams, and we'll cover both over the course of this podcast. But let's quickly reflect on the game. First of all, the team sheet, that didn't start off how we wanted it to. It did in regards of Ted and Mengi being at the heart of the defence. But if you watched the preview podcast, James asked Rob in the pre-match press conference, and he confirmed that Ted was in training. Absolutely no idea where that meltdown on social media on the day of the game, because Sky Sports guessed that he was out, came from. Rob told everyone that Ted was going to start, but obviously something between that press conference on Thursday and kickoff on Monday has happened to Jordan Clark. Don't think anyone's asked him what happened to Clicker, just purely because of the magnitude and I guess the shock of the margin of defeat on Monday night. But it wasn't good not to have Clicker, because we referenced how big a player he could be in that game. And that's not any disrespect to Zach Nelson, but as we pointed out in the podcast we've done, Zach is an attacking-minded midfielder who wants to play behind the striker or in advanced areas. To ask him to play the defensive role against Josh Brownhill, who's a seasoned Premier League campaigner, there was an element of not throwing him under the bus, because he's better than that. He earned his place with some good pre-season performances. But I guess where the question comes from, what does this mean for Pelly Kampanzu? Because he was sat on the bench. Okay, didn't have the best impact in the Celta Vigo game, and if we are going on pre-season, you would say Zach had a better pre-season than Pelly. But there's no doubt that Pelly is more established in that holding stroke defensive midfield role than Zach may ever be.
He is. It may come down to the fact that the pre-season was good, and if you want to stay true to your word about, getting players to come up and progress, then there's that option. But Pelly was second fiddle last season, and that was understandable because Ross Barkley and Sammy Lokonga were there. But maybe in the thinking of Rob Edwards, he is a support player now. I mean, it was going to have to happen one day. If it is now, it's after 10 years of being at the club. But it remains to be seen because that result is going to lead to a lot of soul searching, I would imagine, and what you can change. And maybe it is a case of too much too soon, too quick for those young players. Not that they aren't good enough and couldn't handle it, but they're coming in and they're playing a Premier League side. Both teams were in the Premier League last season, but they've not lost any of their good key players, and it showed.
Oh my, it showed. Yeah, their front four were lively, and they were a problem, and they'll have been a problem if we had every single defender that we've got at this football club fit. And obviously we're going to come on to one defender in particular at some point in this podcast, because if there's anything to take from this week, the return of Tom Lockyer at the training ground just puts everything into a little bit of perspective. Goals 1 and 2 were not good. No pressure on the ball. That's the first problem. If we're going to defend as high up as we are, and we are, Rob has made no secret of the fact that he's not changing the way that we played last season. We're going to play exactly the same way. So if you defend high up with no pace, and pace will change when Amari's back, for example. But right now, there's no pace in that back three. That's probably a disservice to Walters, actually. He's quick, but ultimately, I don't think he's a centre-half. He looks a fullback, an absolute out-and-out fullback who was just filling in at centre-half. But with not much pace at the back line, if you have no pressure on the ball, you are so susceptible to a ball over the top. And lo and behold, 2 of them got through. And once the players were ahead of the Luton players, there was no pegging them back. I think Kaminsky could have come out a little bit quicker for the second one, because Odeberg had a bad touch on his way to finishing.
And Mengi was screaming at him to do so. Yeah.
I really do think he was kind of backtracking at the time, preparing for a shot, but that bad touch was that bad. He could have at least covered the angle. Hey, it's his first game. He's been pissing about on a bench with Belgium for most of the summer. I'm not going to criticise him too much for that. But the magnitude of those 2 goals is something that has to change, and it has to change fast, because we concede that particular goal far too many times.
It was worrying because they were good balls, let's be honest, and fair play for them for spotting it. And I think Scott Parker absolutely won the tactical battle on that
all day long.
He saw that a mile off, and they went for the jugular, and they were clinical with it. That first half, they were dominant. They were the much better side, but they had 2 chances, 2 goals. They finished them. They were clinical. And Luton didn't have any. I think what was more worrying for me, we're going to discuss all the tactics and everything, but more worrying for me, I think, was the basics. They looked sharper. Their first touch was better. They all knew what they were doing, and they executed it really well. And everything for Luton was laboured. There was balls that bounced off shins and stuff like that. It was one of those days where when that happens, and it happens a couple of times in a row, you think we're in for a long time here.
And we were, yeah. The one thing you always be able to say about these players, and you can never, ever, 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 whatever the result or anything else, you can never take away their character, their passion, their belief and everything. And at 2-0, Robert obviously got into them at half-time, because we came out a different side in the second half, hit the crossbar through Elijah. That might have just hit Elijah more than Elijah hit the crossbar. But either way, it was a perfect point for where we should have gone for the rest of that second half. If we didn't already know, and we did from the away game last season, James Trafford cannot catch a cross for love nor money. He's clearly not a religious bloke, this boy, because he gets as far away from crosses as he possibly can. Spilled that one, and he was so lucky that it came back into his hands off the crossbar as well. That could have gone absolutely anywhere. And not 5 minutes later, maybe it's slightly more than that, almost an ideal replica of the Celta Vigo goal. Baptiste crosses to Alfie Doughty at the back stick. This time, Doughty sees Chong on the other side of the goal, nods it across to him for Chong to have a tap in. Obviously, against Celta Vigo, Doughty put the ball in himself. And at 2-1, we're back in it. Then we have that ridiculous situation, which football really, really, really needs to stamp out, of someone just going down with nothing wrong with them so that they can have a little team talk and mid-half break, which seems to happen a lot when Scott Parker is managing.
It's very frustrating, and you could see it a mile off. But how do you stop it?
You stop it by saying that physios can treat players while the game goes on like it does in rugby, because he ain't going to leave his teammates defending with 10 with nothing wrong with him when a physio comes over there. And the physio's got to him so slowly that if there was something wrong with him, he'd have died. That's how slowly they got over to him. And I shouldn't joke about that because of what happened at Bournemouth, and I apologise for that. They weren't even breaking out of a walk to get over to him. So this was clearly a planned thing. And I know the bloke went off, and that might even have been part of the tactical issue anyway. But football has a major, major problem with that, and that needs sorting more than anything else that gets sorted out in football. That has to be sorted out quickly. But from there onwards, it was a different game again. It was the first half repeated, wasn't it? They were on the front foot. They were attacking. They were only doing it off the counter-attack, but you would only do it off the counter-attack when you lead 2-1. We had that situation where Zach Nelson tried his hardest to bring one of the midfielders down. He was dragging him by the shoulders, got round his waist, and at one time I thought he was going to ankle tap him as well, but couldn't bring him down, got booked afterwards. Then we had that third goal, set piece. You should never concede set piece goals as easily as that. And then the fourth goal, I mean, Foster's got all of Luton to run into. If he picked the right pass, we were in trouble. And he did pick the right pass, and we were in trouble. And that was the fourth one. And I mean, you have to hold your hands up and say to Burnley that whilst I absolutely hate that mid-half team talk nonsense thing, they looked a crack hot outfit. And I wasn't sure what to make of Burnley going into the season with no Vincent Kompany and everything else. But on the evidence of Monday night, it's going to take a good team to top them at the end of the season.
I think we saw the champions there because they haven't really lost a lot. In fact, they've got too many players. They need to offload them somehow. They've got very quick players. Their problem in the Premier League is the same with Luton. It was not scoring goals and attacking. It was keeping them out. But in the Championship, that Dara O'Shea is a very good player at the back, and obviously he scored the goal. And it's one of those really frustrating things because you know how good he is in the air, Dara O'Shea, and nobody was there with him. Admittedly, they worked that really well. There was a little shove on Nelson, nothing that you could say is worthy of a foul. It was legitimate pushing and shoving that what happens in every corner, but he pushed him, got blocked off. Nelson couldn't get near him. But what's Nelson doing marking him? Get a central defender on them. But then again, we haven't got any central defenders, and that's part of the problem, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yep. And really and truly, if it wasn't for Thomas Kaminsky in that second half, it could have got even messier than it did. I mean, the save that
could have been 7-1 comfortably.
The save that he made at 2-1, the point blank one, I think from O'Shea again. I see it in the Kenilworth end. It was in front of the Oak Road end, and I have absolutely no intention of watching the highlights of that game back ever again. But I think it was O'Shea from fairly short range, the one that he pushed out for a throw in almost. That was an absolutely brilliant save.
Roberts.
Or was it Roberts?
Roberts, yeah.
Absolutely brilliant save, and credit to him for that. So let's dissect, where did it all go wrong? Well, we know we're without defenders. We said it in the preview podcast. We said it in the season preview podcast. We know we're devoid of central defenders. So there's an outcry for signing central defenders. How many central defenders does one football club need, for God's sake? We sign a central defender. These central defenders are going to be back. Amari Bell was on the bench. That's very much positive. We thought he wasn't going to be back much before the end of the month. It may be that he's involved as recently as a Carabao Cup tie, which will come along in a couple of weeks' time. If he's not involved, maybe the magnitude of the result on Monday night means that he's involved even as early as Saturday. But when you haven't got the personnel to play the way that you want to play, something has to change, doesn't it? Now, I've been pretty strong on this podcast that I was convinced that we would play with a back four this season. And the reason why I was convinced that we would play in a back four this season is because we concede the same goal every single time. Now, I've got a little statistic for you here, Jimbo. Since we beat Brighton last day of January, so we're coming up to the better part of 8 months. We've played 18 games of football. I'm not including the Man City Cup game, although maybe I could. Here's some numbers: 4, 3, 2, 4, 3, 1, 4, 1, 2, 2, 1, 5, 5, 2, 1, 3, 4, 4. Now, I'm not reading out your telephone number or your mobile number. Those are the numbers of goals we've conceded since that Brighton game. Now, that is 5 twice, 4 5 times, including Monday night, and 3 another 3 times. That's only 18 games, and I didn't include that Man City Cup tie where they scored 6, so we could have added that to the equation as well. That is 12 times in 18 games we have conceded 3 or more. Now, I am fully behind Rob Edwards. I love everything the bloke stands for, and I completely am on board with the fact that he wants to entertain. But you cannot win games of football if you have to score 3 goals just to get a point. That is not sustainable. Now, I thought we would change to a back 4 and stop having the extra man against us in midfield. That's not happened, and that extra man in midfield on Monday night just picked us off at will. It wasn't the same man all the time, but that's the beauty of having 3 in midfield. It's never going to be the same man in midfield until we get defenders back. And it might even be that when we get defenders back, he will go back to the back 4. As I've mentioned a couple of times, Walters looks an out-and-out right back to me. It may be then that, a back 4 would consist of, I don't know, I'm speculating of Doughty, Mengi, Burke, Walters, for example. But whilst we're waiting for these defenders to come back, something has to give, because those numbers are alarming.
Yeah, they are very alarming when you read them out that much and that frequent. There's an argument to say that was the Premier League, and I would.
There absolutely is that argument, yeah.
But that the spaces they're leaving and the opportunities can still be created in the Championship, but maybe they won't be as prolific at scoring and taking them. Unlike Burnley, they were devastating, killer.
But we're kind of playing Russian roulette in the hope that the gun isn't loaded when the trigger gets pulled, aren't we? With that regard, I'd much rather us not give so many of those chances up than rely on someone missing the chances, because ultimately, even if they score twice, we've got to score 3 to win that game of football. It's asking so much. And the one thing we wanted from the preview was to look good going forward, because we knew we were going to look shabby defensively or not prepared defensively. We knew that. Could you hand on heart say we looked really good going forward at any stage in that match? Maybe 15 minutes after half time. Apart from that, I think Trafford's made 2 saves, hasn't he? He's caught a shot from Elijah shortly after they opened the scoring, and a deflected shot from Zach Nelson, which you and I could have caught and cracked on. He didn't have any saves of note to make. We're at home here. We're 2-0 down. We're chasing the game. I think I'm right in saying we only had 2, what the stats sites would say, big chances, one of which we scored. That would be not more of a concern, because obviously the defence is a concern. I've just highlighted it. But that's a concern, because if we're not looking good in attack and we're posting these numbers defensively, until we get this sorted out, until these players are back, until signings come in, we're just giving everyone a head start, really.
Yeah, I'm not too worried about the attacking stats, because if you're playing a potential promotion rival, which is what this was billed as, there shouldn't be that many chances. Your defence should be better. There should be better 1 or 2 chances per game in a game against 2 of the bigger teams, not clubs in this division. That sounds about right. But it was the fact that it was so open in defence. It does start from the front as well, though. The press was neither here nor there. And when they did half-heartedly try to do it, that's when Burnley sprung the trap and they bypassed the midfield, which didn't exist anyway, and then they were in.
I mean, there's a lot of criticism of Zach Nelson for the opening goal, and yes, he doesn't track Brownhill's run. Brownhill is a very clever footballer. Zach Nelson's not a defensive midfielder, but that's by the by. He was picked in that position. He should be able to. But the Ogbeni closing down, I think it was the left back, Lucas, someone or other. He motioned to go towards him, but at no stage did he really put him under any pressure and rush him. And if you don't rush quality footballers at any level, if you don't rush a quality footballer and you give them time and space to pick out a guy who they know instantly as soon as the ball is at his feet is going to make a run. Just think of that Ollie Watkins goal down here last season from the free kick. Douglas Luiz didn't even look at the bloke. They showed it on Match of the Day, didn't they? They were looking at the guy who everyone thought was offside on the other side of the pitch, and played the ball to Watkins because he knew he was off as soon as. And that's exactly where we're at. If you're only going to make a token gesture to close a player down, you've got to fear the worst at the other end. And it was exactly the same for the second goal. Chong again, just literally ambled towards the bloke who played that one. I think this one was Roberts who played this ball through for Odebert to score. If you don't force them into mistakes, you're not going to get any mistakes and you're going to get punished.
That's the risk and reward that it always comes with this pressing style. If you get it right, work's a treat. If you do it half-assed or you don't all go as a team, a good team will pick you off. So I saw it time and again in the Euros this summer, where some teams weren't that well drilled in it. Spain were fantastic at it, and it always worked. But if you haven't got the personnel willing to do that, or it's not working to do that, there must be some sort of plan B, which, even though it's at home against that side, maybe we've got to keep this tight now, lads, and keep back. Are they going to play through us? Well, they might be able to, but their biggest strength is to go in behind because they've got all that pace with those four attackers. That's their main attribute. So why not use the lower block, for want of an overused term, and make them try and play between you? Because you've also got pace as well in attack, so you can spring out and do that. But I think that just the tactics just weren't right. That Parker got his right, Edwards didn't, and Luton suffered.
Yeah, the other thing is we're asking two men to cover three in the centre of the park, and you just got to use simple mathematics. That ain't working. And I know we've got two in advance of them in the hope that we can pin their centre-backs and things like that. I get all of that. But ultimately, games of football these days in particular are won in the centre of the park. And we had nothing in the centre of the park. And that is...
Not only that, but everything attacking-wise was down the wing. And that they were doubling up, tripling up sometimes on Doughty. They know that's the main threat. And his deliveries were a bit off anyway from dead balls, so that wasn't helping. Chio hadn't clicked into gear yet. It didn't seem quite the same when he came back from his injury, and it's only one game, so let's also not get too carried away that he hasn't got back up to speed yet. It could be just that one game where the whole team were well off it, but that cuts down 50% of your attacking ideas if both aren't really going at defenders.
I mean, the one thing you'd say in Rob's defence, he switched them a few times, particularly in the first half.
He had to, because Doughty was getting crowded out and getting frustrated, and so he had to.
So he recognised that and used the cards that he had available to him. I have to say, I'm not a huge fan of the comment that when Mike asked him about substitutions not coming until 3-1, and he said, I looked behind me and I didn't see anything to improve it. Thought there were a couple of players that were asking to come off and be replaced really with their performance, and we did have replacements. And I actually thought when Andros Townsend came on, we looked lively again. We had a direct threat. He put balls in the box, which no one else seemed to want to do, and he would run at his man. Ironically, that was when a centre half went off and we went to a back four. I know we conceded a couple of goals then, but we were chasing the game at that point. But it was it was concerning. It's not season defining. We have to make that point very, very quickly. I think we can tell just with our eyes that we've lost to a side above the level of this level. We've not lost to a side that's going to be scraping around to finish in the top 10 or anything like that.
No.
And the fixture list is about to level out completely in regards to that. But what do they say the definition of insanity is? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting something to change? Ultimately, if we keep on conceding this level of goals and that particular goal all the time, something is going to have to give. Now, that's either personnel, which we know are coming back, but really and truly, there isn't a huge amount of pace other than Amari Bell to come back anyway. Or we're going to have to change the way we set up. We don't need to, we're not talking park the bus. We're not talking low blocks. Just drop 20 yards. Just save yourself 20 yards of running. You know, you can cover it in 20. No way, no one beats Mengi over 20 yards in a 10-yard sprint. No one does. And that's absolutely fine. And if they do, you'd like to think that Kaminsky's on his toes and would cover the overhit ball anyway. But so it's all well and good wanting to be entertaining, but when you don't look particularly entertaining and you lose 4-1 at home, questions are rightly getting asked. And I think the sensible questions that are getting asked are exactly that. But at the same time, there was an awful lot of toys out of the pram very, very early in the reaction after the game, wasn't there?
The reaction of some of it was ridiculous. I mean,
we need to call a few things out. It's not necessarily our job to call things out, but we need to, this perception that we're not trying to bring players in, that needs to stop right now. They are trying their hardest to bring players in. If you got a program on Monday night, Gary Sweet explained the problem with the transfer window in black and white, over 3 paragraphs of it. Simply, the Premier League sort of drip off hasn't started yet because of the Euros. Now, if you think back to when we were last in this division, we took Premier League drip downs in the form of Cody Dramé, Marvelous Nakamba, and they were the difference in winning promotion. I think that's fair to say. They're the kind of players that we're going to target, but you can't target these players whilst they're swanning off in America, getting ready for the season, because players are still on holiday because they've been to the Euros. That will come, but it's just not going to come, or it hasn't come yet. That's no one's fault, apart from the football schedulers who've got this season starting so close to the Euros. Footballers need a break, a much longer break than what they get, full stop. That's a podcast for another day. But to come out, to have the thought or the assumption that they're not prepared to spend any money, nonsense. They spent 22 million of it last summer. They'll spend money when it's right. However, if I use a transfer in particular that we've been linked with during the summer, and that is the Crystal Palace winger that we were supposedly wanted on loan. So it came out last week that Sheffield United, who have taken him on loan or are close to taking him on loan, have paid a 7-figure transfer fee to take him on loan. So what that means is they've paid, let's just say it's the base 7-figure, £1 million. They've paid £1 million to Crystal Palace to take their player for the next 12 months to improve their player. And then in 12 months' time, with absolutely nothing doing, to give back to Crystal Palace as their player, better than the player that left Crystal Palace. So they've spent money, Sheffield United, to improve someone who, unless they're absolutely written in the contract they have to buy, there's no guarantee they're going to keep. Do I want my club to do that? Do I heckers like? No chance. If we're loaning players or taking players from Premier League clubs, I want to know that unless it's a Kiernan Dewsbury Hall situation where he was way above the level, and even then there was still hope that we might be able to keep hold of him when he left, but he was just so good during that season that it soon became apparent that we couldn't. I don't want us pending out transfer fees to improve someone else's player and give it back to him in 12 months' time, even if he improves us right now. You have to think of the long term, and that cannot be a sustainable model, paying for someone else's player and then giving them back a better version of what you've got down the line. Can it?
Well, Kev, I think it's about time. I think it's high time that Luton splashed the deficit of a small banana republic on 4 undiscovered Paolo Maldinis, who no one's ever seen or heard of, but who somewhere will magically make it all right. I mean, I'm absolutely sick of it. This is nonsense. We've been in the Premier League. I mean, that is the level that we're dealing with on social media. Sometimes it's ridiculous. They are trying. But there's premiums being put on, and you better believe that that's going to go up now after the Burnley game, because they're going to see what Luton need. And whatever anyone wants to say, you might not like it. It might not be particularly sexy for you because you want big signings. The future of this football club is more important than who they signed in this transfer window and where they finish in the league this season. Until Luton have got Power Court up and running, which again was in Gary's programme notes and announced, and should be credited that they're going to skip loads of stages and go to a 25,000 seater stadium.
We was going to come on to that, but yep.
yeah. Don't forget it was originally going to be 17 and a half when it was built, with room to grow. So that's great. And Premier League money has allowed them to do that. That's where it's going. And if you don't like it, then you've not been watching what Luton have been doing for 10 years. You're perfectly within your rights to not like it, but that's what's going to happen. So get used to it.
That's it. Are we going to get to September the 1st without Luton signing a player? No. Are we going to get to September the 1st without Luton spending money on a player? Personally, I don't believe we are. No. Are we going to get to September the 1st and Luton not spend 10 and 15 million pounds on a player, or put up a loan fee of 7 figures to give back to the same club 12 months down the line? No, I don't think we are, to be quite honest.
It's an utter disgrace that Rob Edwards has decided not to become the second coming of Christ and start healing the sick, because we've got a defensive crisis and it needs to happen. It's absolutely outrageous. And why are we tolerating this? It's just ridiculous. I'm joking.
You're absolutely right. Yeah. I mean, look, we've got players to come back. I said it in the season preview podcast. A 4-1 defeat to a bloody good side hasn't changed my mind. This squad, when it's finished, when it's fit, is better than the one that took us up. And I haven't changed my mind. I won't change my mind just on the basis of that. And hey, we might be sat in this studio next week having given Portsmouth a decent beating, and the world is full of roses again, and we don't need a centre-back after all. But the one thing that I think everyone can agree on, we need to reinforce the centre of that midfield. And the people behind the scenes ain't stupid. They know that. They'll be trying. I think I'm right in saying that there was a central midfielder sat between 2 other central midfielders who's on trial on Monday night, sat in the stands between them. So it's clearly obvious that they are looking in that direction. Funnily enough, he's injury prone, so no one wants him. Wasn't Ross Barkley 12 months ago? I mean, that didn't turn out too bad. So they're looking in that area. We do need central midfielders. I don't buy the fact that we necessarily need another central defender. How many central defenders do you want? You just got to get the ones you've got fit, and if they're not good enough, then you've got to sell them and then bring one in, and that's absolutely fine. But don't stockpile the sodding things just because 1 or 2 of them might go down injured again, because they might not. Hey presto, Pelly hasn't gone down injured for a long time. Barkley didn't get injured. You know, and these are freak injuries. The Amari Bell one, I think Rob described as an utter freak, didn't he? And sometimes these things happen. I mean, hey, if you're a cricket fan, you watched Ben Stokes running between the wickets the other day and his hamstring went pop. Can't believe no one saw that coming and let him play a game of cricket. But it's just what happens in sport. And
why bother even getting a central midfielder? We don't need a central midfielder. What we need to do is just build a wall across the centre circle of Kenilworth Road. It speaks to a total lack of ambition from this football club that we can't just build a wall and keep the opposition out. Ridiculous.
Can we put the bricks of that wall into Power Court, please? Get it built a bit quicker, because that's not moving quickly enough either for some people. Heaven forbid. I mean, it's like, people question the club, which you're absolutely entitled to do. We've done it just now. We've questioned a few things that we have concerns about, and that's absolutely fine. But then you moan about a lack of transparency when you get all your questions answered in a programme column. It's like, how transparent do you want? If you want someone to sit there and say, oh, this is why we haven't signed anyone yet, or this is how much money we've got for an undisclosed fee, and alerting the world to how much money we've got to spend going forward, you're in cloud cuckoo land. They're not ever going to do that. No club's ever going to do that. It is never going to happen. You'll find out how much money we've got when they release the accounts at the end of the year, and that's the only time, because they're shooting themselves in the foot. Otherwise, it's like, I've seen a lot of people on social media asking why Rob Edwards doesn't come out and talk about the injuries. So he comes out and talks about the 4 or 5 defensive injuries. He tells them that they're going to be out for 2 months. We go after a defensive player, and the person involved's heard that, all of a sudden a £2 million player, for example, is now costing us £3 million because they've heard that Rob's come out and said we ain't got a central defender for 2 months or whatever. They're not stupid, these people. They give the information that they can, but the information they keep to themselves is kept to themselves for a reason, to not shoot themselves in the foot. And as supporters, we have to trust these people because, okay, we had a quiet January last season, but there's no guarantee we'd have stayed up even if we didn't have a quiet January. But apart from that transfer window, this football club has not let us down in the transfer market since the conference days, really, since we were signing genuine pap.
Yeah, I mean, if you just take one of those examples, the undisclosed fee, which people seem to be rallying against of this week, but it's always been every season. It's like, why don't they announce them? But we've talked about this before on this podcast, but I think even Gary Sweet has talked about it before, where they're not going to do that. Luton are fighting against the tide of money splashing. Some of the teams in the Championship can't afford to do it, but they still do it. They pay more money out than they do get in the hope of getting to the Premier League. Well, Luton have managed to do that, get to the Premier League. They've got those riches, and now people are going, well, now you've got that, why can't you spend all the money? Well, we explained that where all the money's going to go. It's going to go on the sustainability of the football club.
And speaking of sustainability, they still have to follow profit and sustainable rules, which in the Championship are lower. It's only 13 million a season that you're allowed to lose, isn't it?
Yeah.
Therefore, with 2 of our 3 seasons in the Championship, our figure is a lot lower than others. And we, unlike other clubs, are going to play by the rules. Other clubs, hopefully, if they break the rules, will pay for it. Of course, we realised last season that didn't happen, or didn't happen as strongly as it should have done. But we can only play within the rules and hope that those that set the rules trigger the punishments that are worthy of the teams that are chasing the big dream and flounder in those rules.
Absolutely. To come back to the undisclosed fee,
we're talking of John McAtee right now, aren't we? That's the one that done it.
To come back to the undisclosed fee thing, if you're fighting against those clubs that are spending loads of money, they're already paying higher wages, so they've got everything in their court to attract players more than Luton have. Luton have got to play an almost sort of a spy-like game of trying to find gems, not letting people know where they need to strengthen, who they're going to go for. Ross Barkley is a case in point. Nobody saw that coming, but most of the other players that they get, you don't hear about them as these constant transfer sagas in the sort of Andy Johnson mode back in Stilly's days. You don't hear that about them because they've got to keep it under wraps, because they're trying to work within their means, but also they're working with smaller means than everyone else. And I know people will go, but now they've got the Premier League money. But again, you're being told this time and time again. You don't have to listen to me, but it's being told to you by other people, and it's by Gary Sweet. I'm sure he said it once. I'm sure I was in the room when he said it once, that you just can't, they're just not going to spend all that money. It's just not going to happen. They've got to work in a different way to all the other clubs. And so it's not them being untransparent or secretive or anything. Yes, no, they are being secretive, but they're being secretive for a reason.
For their own benefit. Absolutely. And that's the other thing. Our club has gained in profile because of the superb media team that we have. It's gained in profile over the last 5 years to a level where I can't remember it being. I mean, you've been to press conferences that have had all sorts of people down there over the last 2 years in particular. And now, whenever a transfer rumour comes out and someone wants to be noticed, they will use our name. Half of the names that are bandied about of Luton targeting these players is absolute cobblers, because we don't let this information off to journalists. Okay, the odd agent might do, but I've seen our name mentioned with 10, 15 people this summer. It's just not the way we do it. Ross Barkley was at that football club a good week before they signed him, and no one knew about it.
And trust me, as a writer, it used to annoy me immensely, and to a certain degree it does, but I absolutely understand the need for it, for Luton to keep progressing, so that those things don't come out. You only ever hear them on the other side of the fence when players and staff or agents from the other side, not Luton side, maybe leak stuff. But even then, it's not that accurate all the time, like you're saying with the Crystal Palace one. I think you and I both knew that that was a non-starter.
Exactly that. And, I mean, we were down at the training ground last season recording a podcast with Jacob Brown. And I think we can now safely say, because he's signed, that Andros Townsend was there on trial.
Yeah.
We both saw him. We were asked not to mention it because, we didn't want it to get out. I went home from the training ground that day and I had TalkSport on, and TalkSport sources were adamant that Andros Townsend was going to Crystal Palace that very afternoon. And I'd just seen him 10 minutes earlier. That's the kind of levels of nonsense that get bandied around in this transfer window because Sky, TalkSport and other media outlets need to fill airtime because they've built this transfer deadline up for something that it's not. And we're paying a little bit of the price. Just to finish off on the undisclosed transfer fee, there's a humane element to this as well. I don't know if John McAtee knows how much he's been sold for or bought for by Bolton, but if it's a tidy sum for a 25-year-old player who's never played higher than League One, and it's out there, and Bolton fans know how much it is, puts an awful lot of pressure on him to perform, doesn't it, for Bolton straight away. And we are humane at this football club. So maybe we just don't want pressure on his shoulders. And that's fair enough.
Well, they've been stung by the Ryan Giles thing as well, because that did come out that was the record transfer. I'm sure the figure may be not quite on the money, but we're talking in the region of 5 million, and it just didn't work out for him. He didn't click. Then Doughty came in, and he obviously didn't like the fact that he was playing second fiddle, and he's gone out again. I think that they've recouped most of that money from what I understand, which is good. But there's a case in point where they do say something to the effect that it's the record signing, and then it just doesn't work. Maybe that's pressure.
Yeah, absolutely. There's all sorts of reasons, but I have to say the one thing I can criticise the club on a few things. Listen, I've voiced my opinion on tactics, formations, things like that, and concerns that I have with the amount of goals that we're shipping, and I'll happily do so. And I would do it to Rob's face if we were at the training ground interviewing him, because, people who know me know that's however, there are certain things that I have no concerns about and can't question the club over, and transparency is very much one of them. We get told what we need to get told. And as football fans, we have no divine right to know the ins and outs of a duck's arse. But we don't. We don't have that. We just have to place trust in the people that we recognise are good at what they do, because it's their jobs and their heads on the chopping block at the end of the day, and just trust them that over a long term, and this is a long term, this is a 46-game marathon, we've not even got off the start line. Over the long term, we will be absolutely where we want to be. And if we're not, then come May the 10th or whenever it is when the season finishes and we've underachieved, then concerns are legitimate and genuine. But until then, just I understand people get annoyed at being peddled with trust the process, but the process has worked. Let's get behind the process.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was one other thing that I saw got drawn into the whole argument as well. Say, oh, well, they didn't tell us about the kits until 1 second before the season or something like that. If you go back to our season preview, we explained about the kits and why that was never going to be the case. But, there's lots of different commercial aspects that have to come into the situation. But
it's not as easy as sitting there playing football manager now. How old am I? Championship manager. Sitting there playing football manager and everything is hunky-dory, and if you don't like it, you can just not bother saving the game and go back to where you last started. That's not the real world. And the football club operate in the real world. Positives. We need to end this podcast with positives because there are some. There's a big positive that we'll come on to in a minute. But on the pitch, Ruel Walters. I mean, there was a boy who took his first start, ran with it and said, I ain't coming out of this team in a hurry.
I thought it was a very impressive first start. He was my man of the match by a long way.
He was the man of the match, yeah.
He was strong on the ball, good technique, fairly brave with it, playing in a probably not a preferred position. As you said, he's an out-and-out right-back. I think that's what he's been brought in to do. But, what he did was tidy and compact and useful, and he was brave with it, a lot of decent skill as well. So, it'd be good to see him in his actual preferred position when he can maybe support Chio and see that get working. But at the minute it's still the threadbare situation of not having enough defenders and having to fill in. So it's disappointing on that front. But he can only play what he's asked to play, isn't he? And he did a good job.
He wasn't necessarily great, but 90 minutes for Zach Nelson. If Rob is going to bring academy players through, or we are going to attract young players into our academy to come through, there has to be a pathway. There wasn't really under Nathan. I know Nathan kept on saying there was, but he was forced into the James Justin one, and that was really the only one that did. I know there were some younger ones in that EFL trophy when we basically just threw a load of kids out, and if we won, we won, then happy days. But under Rob, there's an awful lot of academy products getting game time on merit rather than being forced into. Yeah, okay, there were a few on the bench on Monday who were only there just to fill that bench. But Zach Nelson's in there on merit. Now, he was out of position on Monday night, and we should appreciate that. And he was up against two really, really good midfielders. But the fact that he has gone and improved enough to be at first team level now speaks a lot of the work underneath the first team, which should be recognised, because we're not ever going to be a club that signs tens of millions of pounds worth of players. Even when we're at Power Court, we will still need to rely on our academy, hence why Solid do such good work. So for their work to be recognised by academy products coming through, and two of them, I should have mentioned Joe Johnson as well, but he's been involved so often now that I kind of have him as a first team regular sort of thing, bodes well for the future, regardless of the fact that they found they're going a little bit tough against a bloody good side.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious is to point out that they were both culpable for goals but they were chasing after Premier League speedsters they couldn't catch, and Zach was not playing in the position that you eventually will think he'll be in, and maybe also
JJ as well.
Joe Johnson has largely been a fullback. I think he's played some centre back for England age groups, which but do you want to be an everyman that can try and do a little bit of every position, or are you going to be a player that excels in one? And so there's this element of it as well, which you're going to have to try and work out. But it's hard for me to talk about it as much as you did, because as I say, I wasn't at the game because I was in the hospital. But everybody was raving about Zach Nelson, but that didn't come across on the television, so I can't really speak about it.
The one thing I would say about Zach, every time he had the ball, I thought he looked really comfortable on it. And it's a baking hot night, right? And here's the other positive. We had near enough 60% of possession against a Burnley side who last time they were in the Championship averaged something along the lines of 72.7% of possession. I've done my research on this.
Something along the lines. Deadly accurate.
It's not. It's if you look at one stat site, it says like 74 and another says 71. I don't know. Surely they all follow the same game. I don't know how they do it. But either way, we had nearly 60% of possession against a side who were going to dominate the ball in this league. Okay, we didn't necessarily do with it what we wanted to do with it. But ultimately, when we don't play Burnley and we play the Leicester sides and we have an improved version of 60%, you would imagine, logically, and we build into this team that Rob tells us we're going to be, we are going to dominate an awful lot of games with the football. Now, there's no sign at the minute that this hot snap is ending. And I take you back a couple of years. It was actually 2 years ago yesterday, Tuesday, when we played that Preston game. And that was bloody hot.
Yeah, I sweat when I think about it.
And if you go to West Ham last season, equally hot. The one thing you have to do in these conditions, you have to keep the football, because it's a bloody long afternoon if you're chasing it. As we found out at West Ham, once Ross Barkley went off and we couldn't keep the ball, that was it. All over. So that's a positive for me. Zach was good on the ball. He used it. I don't necessarily think that I can remember a probing forward pass, but Arsenal signed Declan Rice for 100 million and the bloke ain't got a forward pass in his body, so I'm not going to necessarily criticise that. But we kept the ball really, really well. We didn't concede a goal because we were playing about with it or anything like that. We literally conceded goals from turnovers and an instant sort of attacks from there. So that's a positive, because if we've kind of said towards the end of last season and in the preview podcast for this season that if we're going to get promoted this season, we want to be hitting the Premier League running next season. I think Rob's alluded to it recently that we were just so underprepared for the Premier League, rightly so, understandably so, that he won't let that happen this time. So if we're able to keep the football, that has to be a positive. And 60% possession, and I know game state was an awful lot of it, we were behind for much of the game. But just to have 60% of the possession, that says that some of the work that they're doing on the training ground works. Now they obviously need to add the final flourish to that in the attacking sense. And as we've already alluded to, make sure that when we do get caught on the ball, we put blocks in, or we stop that immediate long ball as quickly as possible. But I thought that that was a positive, because when was the last time you and I sat here and did a podcast on a Luton team that were A, comfortable on the ball, B, wanted to be on the ball, and C, put up possession figures like that? And I take you back to last season, it was the same situation with Chelsea, against Chelsea as well, where we were very surprised that we had more of the ball. If you think back to under Nathan Jones, 40% possession was utopia.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's completely turned around. So yes, while personnel, there are issues, both defensively, injury-wise, and a lack of incomings and stuff. The work that Rob's put into the boys that are here was there to see at times on Monday night. If you delve deeper in, and I know it's a results business, but if you delve a little bit deeper and you want to see it, it is there. Obviously, the result just clouded it.
There is always going to be positives to take from the game. The one positive I can't agree on, and I understand the furore about this, let's say, on the on social media, was the idea that if you took the 4 goals out of it, it was
that's a cobbler's comment.
No, that was silly.
Yeah.
Burnley were they were the better side. They deservedly won. They probably could have won by 7. That's nonsense. But yeah, there are positives in that sense that they kept the ball a bit better. The academy products coming through, that's always going to be good. When all the players come back, Zach Nelson and JJ are going to be in and around the squad, and that's it. They might get 1 or 2 like substitute appearances. I would imagine that would be the case. Because if, Reece Burke comes back, Amari Bell comes back, Mads Anderson comes back, they're all ahead of JJ. And JJ, I think, is ahead of Tom Holmes, which is why Tom Holmes didn't play. And a lot of people said, well, he's got 100 appearances, but yeah, in some in Championship, but in a League One side with Reading, JJ was in and around a Premier League squad last season with, very good players, and he's an England under-20 international. So that's why I think he was ahead of Holmes. If you look at it based purely on experience, then I can understand why you might be confused and scratching your head as why he's not playing in that role.
Left foot as well.
Yeah, so there's a bit of balance. So there's that. And they're not necessarily... That game is not going to be something that Zach Nelson and JJ want to particularly remember as their full debuts, I would not imagine, because hardly anything went to plan, but it's going to set them up in good stead, and I think brings them closer to the first team, if not necessarily going to be regulars once the full squad's back.
Yeah, don't give up on them too. There's talent there, and in their right positions, I'm sure it will shine. We can't end without the positive of the last week, though, James. And it was so good to see, wasn't it, on Tuesday? Actually, it kind of helped us that we didn't do the podcast on Tuesday, because it's given us time to see this and reflect on it and everything else. Thomas Allen Lockyer is back at the brace, and he is brilliant. If he never kicks a football for Luton Town ever again, that's absolutely irrelevant right now. The fact he is happy, healthy, and living life and on his way to potentially doing what he wants to do, regardless of whether that materializes or not, from where we were 8 months ago to now, is just unbelievable. And can I accept a 4-1 defeat at home to Burnley when I see something like that? You bet your life I can, because it's just great to see. And although he's not involved in first team training at the minute, he's purely training on his own and doing his own recovery plan. He'll be in amongst the training ground, he'll be in the canteen, he'll be eating and everything else. And the lift that bloke gives that set of players is just fantastic. And it's so, so good to see that Tom's out with a ball at his feet again.
Magic, and it
Almost a tear to my eye just talking about it. It really, when, I was at Bournemouth, as you know, did I think there and then that I'd get to the day where we saw a picture of Tom with a ball at his feet again? Not really, no. Yeah. And the people that are on social media calling out Luton for letting this happen, this would not be allowed to happen if he hadn't got specialist advice and the all clear from all the specialists. And more importantly, if Tom didn't want to do it. Luton aren't forcing him to do anything he doesn't want to do. Now, if the geezer wants to play football again, that's absolutely his prerogative. That's not for you to tell him that he shouldn't do just because he's had a couple of heart issues in the past. He is his own man. And if he wants to do it, leave him be. If he never kicks a football for Luton Town ever again, or a football for anyone ever again, that's absolutely fine. He's alive. He's well. And it's just so good to see.
We're not even at that point, are we? They're really just please don't speculate about whether he's going to play or not. That is irrelevant at this stage. He may do, he may not. He's voiced his views that he'd love to continue playing, but also that he'll take the medic's advice. Now he's with the same heart guy that was with Christian Eriksen, which is a positive. He's got the defib under his skin now, which again is a positive. So hopefully, what happened to him before will not happen again, and if it does, that little machine kicks in and sorts himself out. But it's not that they left out anything about whether he'll play again or not. That's irrelevant, and it has been irrelevant from the second that he hit the deck at Bournemouth, and the worry that brought. Now, I think it took 9 months for Christian Eriksen to come back. I'd be more than happy if he wants to take another 9 months just to assess whether he can or he can't. And at the end of it, that's his decision. The fact that he's up and around, and don't forget, when it happened, his missus was 7 months pregnant. They've now got a baby that changes things. And it's all about perspective. And that news was perspective on the result, which was good. We didn't record straight away because we went, oh, well, there is perspective. There's more important things of football. And I'm also not as raging as I thought I might be about that, because my little girl was in hospital that same night when the game was played and I wasn't in. You take those things and you go, football's just a game, and people, their lives are more important. So it was great news to see those pictures. And I just hope that he's having a good time. They did a video with tubes off
golf thing,
the golf life off Soccer AM, tubes from Soccer AM, and that was quite entertaining as well. So go and have a look at that once you've watched this, by the way. Go and have a look at that. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, Tom, it is absolutely great to see you kicking a football again down at the Brace, regardless of what happens from here to there. As I said, something that we didn't think we would ever see, and we're so glad that we are seeing that. So no pressure on having you back, but if that's how it ends up materialising that we do, fantastic. If not, that's equally as good with us as well. And the club will rightly do the right thing with Tom Lockyer, and the right thing is to keep him involved in the squad, and the right thing is to give him the confidence and the knowledge that if he does come back, he doesn't have to go to another club. He doesn't have to worry about his future, much in the same way that they gave James Shea a contract when he picked up an injury at the end of the promotion-winning season 2 seasons ago. It's what this football club does, and it's why people serve this football club so well. And it'd be great. It's just great, and I'm sure the more that Tom's about, the more that we'll get to see and hear from him. And who knows how that will end out. Hopefully it does end up with him in a Luton shirt again, but as James said, right now it's still kind of irrelevant. There was a comment, forgive me, I forgot to grab your name, on our YouTube comments when we asked for guests for the podcast, who said, can we get Tom Lockyer on? We were going to, but in light of the recent news, we'll leave Tom to complete his recovery and the next stage of his sort of assessment and things before we ask him to come on. I'm sure once he's back, and if he's back and proper and fulfilling his captain's duties and everything else, he'll come on the podcast. But until then, we'll leave him be, won't we?
Because everyone wants to know one thing: are you going to play again? And at the minute, that's irrelevant, and he doesn't.
He doesn't know.
I
have to stress, we wouldn't ask him that if he was sat here right now, we would genuinely talk to him about his career, about the team, and we wouldn't ask that question.
No, just how
it's
he's
just not
how he's doing.
It's just not what we would do. Yeah, we would just see how he is and things, but at no stage ever would we ask.
Well, he couldn't answer it anyway. That's not the point. They're doing the work to try and get to that point where you can have the decision to be made, and no, they're nowhere near that, and let's not put any pressure on them.
No, absolutely. But it is great to see that he's back at the brace now and continuing his recovery. So there are some positives from a pretty dismal night of football, it has to be said. Burnley, if you're a Burnley fan watching this, you can look forward to a decent season, I reckon, because that was pretty good that you gave us everything that you'd got there, and we weren't really ready to take it, it has to be said, and fair play to you for that. If you're a Luton fan watching this, keep your chin up. I think a famous man once said, never too high, never too low. Keep it on an even keel, and we'll go again on Saturday. That famous man, of course, John Steele, he kind of knew what he was on about, didn't he? So, bad night at the office, and let's hope there's not too many more of them to follow. Understandably, no correct scores that were correct for that one. We got the goals part right, didn't we? Unfortunately, too many of them ended up in the wrong net for our liking. So 0-0 everyone with regards to correct scores, so must do better for the Portsmouth game.
Well, all round must do better for the Portsmouth game, not just score predictions, but there's a lot to ponder and think about for this coming game, which is not going to be easy.
Nope, and we'll discuss that in our next podcast. That's pretty much it for this episode of the podcast. Thank you very much for watching or listening, however it is that you've consumed this podcast. We really do appreciate it, and of course, please do keep your comments coming in. We do look at all of them, and we try our hardest to answer them, but obviously, as we've pointed out, and as James has pointed out during this podcast, life and everything else does sometimes get in the way. Our thanks also to the Barber Club and the lower level in Luton for staging our studio. We really appreciate that. To Sean Grant and the Wolfgang for our brand new intro that you've heard on recent podcasts, and indeed well done to James for all of the images and stuff that you've put together for that. That's really good for this championship season, and to Ed Smith Creative for the designs that you see on set. We really appreciate that. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, which will be a preview of a big game on Saturday against Portsmouth from James and myself. Come on, you Hatters.
And up the NHS.
For me, it's the people and the spirit of the people as well.
I love this town. I love this town. I love this town. You know what I love about this town is actually you. Everyone in it has got this massive soul.
We're Luton people, and that's what we care about.